Now then, so it's been another year since I did a sort of big review of where I thought Gwent was at, and been a year on now, so thought I'd have a look at it, think about how the game's been over the past year, how it's looking for the year going forward, and whether you should get involved in the game. So this can kind of operate as a bit of information for anyone who's looking to get into the game, and if you're already playing, a bit of insight from somebody who plays it a lot, and is quite deep into the whole thing, and there's a few things. So for a bit of information on like who I am, if you don't regularly watch my videos, I'm go by Inari, and I've been playing card games for a long time, and Gwent is kind of the one that's become my main game and the one I've stuck with for quite a while. And that's more of a testament to how good the game is. It's not me prefacing this saying I'm going to be very biased, because I won't be. I'm happy to criticize the game. Which kind of leads me into the next thing. Full disclaimer that I am a Gwent partner, but that's more of a scheme that CDPR have that give content creators a more direct line to devs and that kind of thing, and can get involved in events. I'm not paid by CDPR. I'm perfectly free to say whatever I like about the game, and I will happily criticize the game when I feel it needs criticism, so there won't be any bias on that kind of thing. I'm not paid to say anything like this. So I'll just put that out there before anybody mentions being part of the partner program. So I will add timestamps to the video if there's a particular part of the game you're interested in. We're going to cover the economy of the game, general gameplay stuff, card releases, and the overall balance. So if you either go in the description or if you look at the progress bar, you'll be able to skip to particular bits if that's what interests you. So final bit, there's also going to be gameplay running and that kind of thing, so it's not just my face talking the whole time. So you have a little visual stimulation, and we'll go into the first section. So we're going to start off with something that personally is one of the most important areas, which is the economy of the game. And this can kind of make or break a CCG, and the main reason being if you feel like it's impossible for you to compete without spending a lot of money, it can really put you off the game no matter how good the gameplay is. If you feel like you're pigeonholed into constantly spending just to compete, it really throws you off. That's kind of what drove me away from games like Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering Arena, was like I just had to dump money into it to even have a chance or to even get a fraction of the card collection, which is kind of leans into why I've stuck with Gwent for so long, because the game is ludicrously generous, and that isn't me overselling it, it genuinely is. I don't understand how they can even make money from this game, considering how easy it is to get a full collection. So I've been playing for about two and a half years now, and I have enough resources. I have all the cards. I have enough resources that I can pretty much craft every single card that's ever going to come out for the next decade and still have tons of resources left. It's kind of ludicrous. I personally get the journey, which is like £8 for every 3 months, but that's only because I just want the cosmetics and I generally play the game a lot, so I may as well. But it's by no means necessary for resources. I would suggest it for new players. It's definitely a generous source, but yeah, it's just set up in this way where you never feel like you have to put money into the game to get cards. You very quickly put together a collection. Even kind of from day one, you can put together 2 or 3 really strong decks within the first month, which is kind of insane. And that pace doesn't really slow down, so you never really have to worry about getting a full collection of cards together, which is quite rare. Now, although this is perfect for players, my only hope is that this doesn't impact revenue so much that future content or the future of the game in general is impacted. that's kind of outside my wheelhouse. That's something for devs of the game to worry about. But that's my only concern, that it would actually impact the future of the game. But at least for players, it's kind of perfect. So no complaints here. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. When it comes to gameplay, Gwent's kind of different from the usual CCG format, because if you've played them before, you know the general thing of like life points. You have a mana system, you play out your units, monsters, minions, whatever you want to call them, and you have spells, and then you need to get your opponent's life points to 0 before yours do. But Gwent, although it sticks to the format of units and spells, it moves away from that life point system. If you played it in The Witcher 3, the best suggestion or comparison rather I can make is that it's like a beefed out version of the minigame from The Witcher 3, because the general idea is each turn you play one card, that's it, and you're looking to get points on the board, and you want to have more points than your opponent, so you have cards that either remove points for your opponent or gain points for you. And you then play 3 rounds. When you have 2 rounds wins, so it becomes a resource management kind of thing. There's no point winning the first round massively if it means you have no chance in the second or third round. And this kind of system was what first got my interest in the game, and it's kind of what's got me to stick with it, because although I do play the more traditional style of card games, so play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh for example, this system's kind of a bit of a breath of fresh air, so it's kind of great. In terms of what strategies are available in the game, there are gimmicky kind of strategies, so things like mill, for example, prevalent in pretty much every card game. Although they're playable, for the most part, they're only fun to play and they don't really impact the meta too much. There was a brief period where mill became quite good, but that was maybe for about a fortnight, while hyper-thin decks were very common. So by and large, it's a system that's put together quite well and isn't really exploited by super gimmicky strategies or anything like that. Of course, that system's perfect. Initially, the game didn't really have any RNG. There was a lot of stuff that just flat units and numbers and that kind of thing. It was meant to be this kind of system where the only RNG was going to be card draw. All the cards do what they say on the tin. But recently there's been a few cards that have crept in that have more randomness involved. So for example, Alza is a huge one, which spawns a random unit based on like the provisions of the spell you used. So there's a lot of variance on this. For example, if you play one of the biggest spells in the game, get anything from a 1 power unit up to like a 10 power, I think is the highest one. Could be wrong, but see what I mean? There's a big variance, and there's just been a few cards that have crept in with, you know, damage a random unit, bleed a random unit, that kind of thing. So I hope this isn't really a trend going forward. I don't mind small amounts of it here and there. It's just if it creeps into the gameplay in general and becomes much more prominent. But that's just conjecture, a bit of my concern going forwards in terms of how the game is right now. The only real RNG is draw, but I mean, you can't really get away from that in a card game. You're always going to have draw RNG, so in general, it's looking pretty good. The cards releases is something that's been a strange year. The way they planned to do the expansion for this year was do like mini card drops. They kind of broke down one full expansion into 3 smaller expansions. So they're releasing like little packets of cards, so each faction got like 4 cards, and then some neutral cards came out. And I just personally didn't like that. I don't think many people really liked that system. It seemed like it was kind of a bit of an experiment, and hopefully they've recognised it was a bit of a failed experiment and learn from that kind of going forwards in terms of how to do card releases. Problem with that kind of system of doing it like that was there were cards in the mini expansions that were meant to work with cards that came out later in the expansion. So you ended up with, for example, your favorite faction could have got 4 cards, and 2 or 3 of them were just unusable for like 4 months until the cards that were meant to support them actually came out. So it just didn't really work. Really didn't work. But on the more positive side, they did release a lot of legendary cards, like some big impactful ones. And a lot of these were really, really good. Few were a little too strong, so things like Milver, King of Beggars, for example, too strong when they came out, but obviously they were tweaked, but a lot of them were really, really impactful. They kind of reinvigorated some dead archetypes, to be honest. The release of like Unseen Elder, Detlaf, and Regis, alongside a couple of changes to how vampires work, basically brought vampires from a dead archetype to a competitive meta deck, which is kind of insane. At the time of recording this, I would probably argue they're the best deck for monsters right now, which I never thought I'd see myself saying. Things like the release of like Crack and Bran basically made pirates relevant, as well as the change to the Onslaught leader. And Saskia as well. Saskia for Scoia'tael was kind of ridiculous. Combination of Milver and Saskia brought guerrilla tactics back from the dead. So yeah, there's been a lot of cards that have literally brought archetypes back and dragged them up by the scruff of the neck, which is really nice to see. I'm always a fan of seeing these kind of changes, and sure, some were too strong when they came out, but I would rather see something like that, you know, and it need hot fixing, or in a month it's patched and it's brought back down to level. But the actual, at least the attempt to release new cards that are going to reinvigorate dead archetypes is always a good sign. They're not just leaving archetypes like failed experiments and throwing them to the wayside, which is always really nice to see. This is a big one. The overall balance of the game. And this is something that is rare to see done well. And in general, and very heavy emphasis on in general, they get it right in Gwent. And this last year, we've seen quite a big improvement, because there was definitely a few periods back in 2020 where some decks were just too dominant. Like there was a time when Vibe, for example, was too strong. Skellige Warriors had a period where they were just out of control. But we've, in general, seen that this year the meta's definitely stabilized quite a bit. What we're kind of seeing is that every faction is playable. Although some have been a little better at some points, a little worse, there's never been a period where a faction is completely unplayable. Just there's no chance it can compete. So actually being able to choose a faction, sort of in your own mind, have a deck that you're really interested in, and it actually be able to win games, really, really nice to see. Because personally, I get bored of metas very quickly. They become very stale in my eyes. So having this kind of system where a lot of decks make up the meta rather than just playing against one deck every single game, it's really, really nice to see. Now, obviously some decks are going to dominate. That's just how these kind of things work. At the time of recording, Jackpot Syndicate is very, very strong. But it isn't that if you play Jackpot Syndicate, you're going to win 90% of your games. You match up against Syndicate, you're going to lose every time. It's not like that by any means. And really big improvement over the last year. I sometimes felt a bit concerned when I'd see the patch notes, because there'd be very minor changes to stuff, and a lot of the time I'd look at it and think that's not going to be enough to fix it, but it usually is. A couple of point tweaks have been enough to either bring decks back or bring other ones right down. So yeah, definitely an improvement over the last year. Not my concern going forwards with the whole release schedule of cards for next year is that there is a risk that the meta could become stale if things are shook up. I really hope that this isn't the case and there's relevant tweaks during the patches that actually keep the meta shifting a little bit, so we're not stuck with playing these same decks for the next 6 months or anything like that. But I mean, I'm quietly confident that things are going to stay pretty good. All they got to do is keep following this formula of making sure each faction's roughly in line with each other, and we should be good to go. This section's going to be a bit of a downer, but the competitive scene of Gwent is something that I would definitely like to see improved a little bit. So usually with TCGs and that kind of thing, I do like to push for like a competitive kind of spot in whatever tournaments they have organized, that kind of thing. Although it doesn't appeal to everyone, the competitive side of card games is something that I personally really enjoy. But the problem Gwent has is it's not really an incentive. The system that's currently set up really only facilitates either you play hundreds of games every single month and finish consistently at the very top of the leaderboards to get into Masters at the end of the year, or you win one of the top 64 playoffs to get into Masters, which is usually the more efficient route to get there. However, the actual financial incentives of these tournaments is kind of non-existent. We just had Masters, and the prize money for that, which is meant to be the sort of end of the year big tournament, everyone's been working towards it. The prize money for that was actually lower than the first Open, which the Opens are to qualify for Masters. So yeah, it's really not incentivized to be competitive in the game, like, at all, which I would really like to see changed, because I know for like myself and plenty of people, having some sort of goal at the very, very top can be make or break, and so I really hope this is something that's kind of addressed over the next year, that the tournament system's a little bit tidied up. They did release like a tournament client, so we could do community tournaments all kind of integrated in the system, which was a great idea, and I would love if it was good. However, what happened was it's just full of bugs. You really can't rely on it, and so what's happened is people have just gone back to using sites like Challenge and stuff to run tournaments, just because the in-game tournament stuff just is not reliable. You want to run a tournament smoothly, and you can kind of see this when you go on the tournament tab on the website. There's nothing on, not a single tournament running, beyond like some jerk ones people have set up that are going to happen in like 70 years. But yeah, that's definitely a disappointment to see. Just hope this is something that's addressed, because I would love to get involved in the competitive side, but the amount of time I would have to put in for very little payoff just doesn't make it worth it in my eyes. I think I've covered all the main sections I wanted to talk about, so we'll just quickly do like a closing point kind of thing. Round it all together, speak about a couple of things. So, in general, I feel like the game's going in the right direction. But during the middle of the year, when the mini expansions were coming out, I was all concerned I might burn out, because that was starting to become a bit stale. But it's definitely been turned around the back end of the year, and currently, when I'm recording this in January, it's looking very, very solid, and I just kind of hope it's kept up. Now, my criticisms kind of still stand. Like I say, I hope the card drops and patches are actually impactful, and we don't see a stale meta come into place, because that would very, very bad step for the game. I think it's in a good spot, and I hope the changes they've been doing, things of that ilk, are kept up. And I would really, really like to see more incentive on the competitive side of the game. Even community-based stuff, not necessarily Doesn't necessarily have to be for the best of the best, just more support and more incentive towards playing community tournaments, something that they can definitely push towards, you know, offering prizes and that kind of thing, would be a really nice thing to see, because there's definitely space in the community and the game in general for more tournaments. I think that's my final kind of point on it, is the game is 1000% worth playing at the moment. Super, super generous, and you don't have to sink a single penny into it, and it's very kind of refreshing gameplay loop that they have in place. And it's, I think in general, game's going in the right direction. Few areas they can work on, but I think it's definitely in a good spot. So if you got to the end of my rambling, I greatly appreciate it. Usual kind of stuff. If you enjoyed the video, liking it really helps. Subscribing, commenting, all that kind of stuff helps me out. And of course, there's going to be plenty more Gwent content coming from me in the future. So, talked more than enough, and we'll catch you in the next one.